Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
So, the ground war has begun in election 2019, but will the rules of engagement be fair? Twitter today has declared it'll ban political advertising from its platform, piling the pressure on Facebook to do the same, a move that its boss, Mark Zuckerberg, has resisted. Well, tonight, the Electoral Commission have told this programme they're disappointed and concerned that the UK's laws on digital campaigning haven't been updated, even though they made recommendations more than 2 years ago. Our political correspondent, Paul McNamara, reports.
The time for protest is over.
People have a chance to vote for real change.
Voters deserve better.
The starting gun's finally been fired, and the race will take 6 long weeks. Much of the campaigning in this election, though, will be done here. Millions of pounds will be spent beaming political messages direct to voters. It's a hugely influential digital battleground, but governed by rules designed for an analogue world.
It was all so much simpler a few years ago. Think of a message and pop it on a poster or a leaflet, as long as you include who's behind it. Online, well, last year, this pro-Brexit campaign group may have reached up to 10 million people. Who are they? Who's funding them? Well, nobody knows. Facebook say they've now changed their rules so that this sort of thing isn't possible. But that's not the case on all platforms. And just how are specific groups being targeted for these adverts? Well, thanks to this database, we now know what ads are being sent, but experts say there is still far too little information about why they're being sent to specific groups. And what about just plain old fact-checking? Remember this from the referendum? Well, experts say there is still very little to stop this sort of misinformation.
During the last election, 40% of all money spent by parties was spent online. The man in charge of the body that regulates elections, the Electoral Commission, expects it to be even more this time. In 2017, they made a number of recommendations, none of which have yet been changed.
It is the responsibility of parliaments to maintain our electoral law. It's not a vote-catching thing, it's just a responsibility to update and maintain. And we've had a succession of governments and parliaments going back a number of years who've not done that, not had the opportunity to do it, perhaps not had the will to do it. My call will be, the Commission's call will be in the next Parliament, that all the parties, in a cross-party way, join up, recognise it would be a really good thing to do to update our electoral law.
You've made your recommendation 2 years ago. Why are we still in this situation?
I'm not going to pretend the Commission is really disappointed and concerned. We are. We mustn't think that it undermines our rules, because we have a really good, strong democracy in the UK and really good elections. But it would be hugely helpful. It would hugely help public confidence, all our confidence, if the rules are updated.
Dabbling with democracy is an international business. Parliament's Intelligence and Security Committee passed a report into Russian actions against the UK to Downing Street 2 weeks ago, and there's apparently a big section on elections.
Parliament and the public ought to have and must have access to this report in light of the forthcoming election, and it's really unacceptable for the Prime Minister to sit on it and deny them that information.
Downing Street say there is a process to go through before reports are released, which can take several weeks to accomplish. The threat, though, say experts, is real.
It's very difficult to stop foreign actors from engaging in online campaigning. When the rules were written, people imagined that in order to campaign, you need to be in the country. That's no longer the case, and therefore we don't have adequate rules to stop foreign interference.
And is that a genuine concern?
It is a concern. There have been concerns clearly about Russian interference at recent elections, but any international actor could get involved if they decided, and it would be very, very difficult on the current rules for us to know if that's happening.
The world of paid-for political campaigning can be murky, and it's a world Twitter has decided it wants no part of. Last night, its founder Jack Dorsey tweeted, "We've made the decision to stop all political advertising on Twitter globally. We believe political message reach should be earned, not bought." It's a ban which Facebook won't follow. Possibly not surprising, given that in the 2017 election, political parties spent £56,000 on Twitter, but £3.2 million on Facebook. Its founder Mark Zuckerberg today defended their policy of running ads that could spread false information and possibly steer elections. Industry watchers on the other side of the Atlantic question Mr. Zuckerberg's reasoning.
They've said that this is a free speech question, but at some point
how do you let politicians lie to everyone, especially when they're doing these micro-targeted ads, so maybe we don't even know what lies people are being fed. Facebook's very big and it is influential.
The EU referendum was largely fought online.
Roughly about 7 million people, 1.5 billion digital ads.
That's Dominic Cummings, the man behind the Leave campaign, who's now in Downing Street. But it took more than 2 years and a parliamentary inquiry to find out how the online battle for the referendum was fought. Now, once more, we are heading into a national vote being played on a digital pitch, being umpired by analogue laws.
Paul McNamara reporting. Well, joining me now from Washington, D.C. is Brett Bruen, who was Director of Global Engagement at the White House during President Obama's administration. And with me here in the studio, Carl Miller, co-founder of the Center for the Analysis of Social Media at the think tank Demos. Welcome to you both. Let me start with you, Carl. We heard Dominic Cummings there in Paul's report boasting about the fact that during the 2016 referendum campaign, they pumped out 1 billion ads to 7 million users in the last week of the campaign, and that made a huge difference, he thought, to the way the campaign went. Now, let's just look at some of them. Here's a famous one. Turkey is joining the EU, good news, yes or no? Of course, this wasn't true, right? Nor was the next. Let's look at the next one. Okay, the EU blocks our ability to speak out and protect polar bears. Who would have known? And another one. Here we go. European Union wants to kill our copper. Now, it seems like a bad joke now, but these were very effective, weren't they? The question to you, Carl, is, has anything changed since 2016 to make that kind of stuff impossible?
No, not really, not under the law. I mean, the Electoral Commission has been very, very slow in trying to apply the same basic standards and principles which it enforces offline onto the online world as well. So, I mean, the bitter irony here is that the online world has become more and more important, and exactly at that moment, it's stayed a complete free-for-all.
So there must be some, and we've talked about this endlessly for the last few years, there must be some new regulation that has come into force that makes this more difficult to pump out.
There's very little. I mean, the Electoral Commission has tried to get the cooperation of the tech giants, and to be fair to them, they have tried to make political advertising more transparent. So Facebook now publicises political ads. They try and describe who's paid money for them, but it's still incredibly murky, very, very shadowy. We don't know what kind of ads are being sent to what people.
Okay, let's go to Brett in Washington, D.C. Brett, we sent you those via email. You had a look at these ads as well. Presumably, in the United States, where you also have an election coming up, well, not presumably, let me ask you the question. Is this kind of stuff more difficult to pump out? Are there more regulations in place now or not?
Not at all. In fact, we are in a situation right now where the tradecraft, the kind of techniques that Russia, others who've gotten in the game like Iran, even China, they're far advanced from where they were in 2016 here in the US, and certainly during the Brexit campaign in the UK. Prior to that, it is worrying that not only government, but I have to say these tech companies, social media companies, have not done enough to, let alone deal with the problem, even try to track it, understand what's happening, where the ball is right now. So we're going into these elections flying largely blind.
And how is that possible, given all the adverse publicity that Mark Zuckerberg has received as a result of Cambridge Analytica?
Well, you look at what happened after the congressional testimony that Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey gave. There was no action taken by Congress. I've been asking the question here in Washington, who is in charge of disinformation in the U.S. government? And the answer that I've gotten is essentially no one. I think the same question could be asked in London. Who is the person that is in charge of defending British democracy from disinformation?
Okay, well, you know, Carl Miller, who is in charge?
Well, no, my colleague here is completely right, and here's another bitter irony for you. I mean, these ads drive polarisation. They are part of the story of society splitting apart, and for that very reason, democracies are becoming more paralysed. We've had Brexit squatting our political landscape here in the UK now for so long, it's been so difficult to pass other laws through. So.
Okay, but I mean, to be fair, of course, the other side, the Brexit side will say, well, hang on a minute, Remain put out all this Project Fear stuff. But the difference between the Project Fear ads, which were projections of what would happen to the economy if people voted to leave, which many of these things haven't happened yet, 3 years later, they may still happen, was that they weren't targeted specifically in the same way that a lot of the stuff that Dominic Cummings was putting out. Is that right?
No, I don't think the point here is to drive a kind of party political distinction between the character of different campaigns. Like, the real story and the most important thing for us to dwell on is this is changing the nature of elections and democracies. Suddenly, campaigns across the world can pump out tens of thousands of different stories about who they are and what they want to tens of thousands of different communities. That is so injurious. It breaks apart the common glue that we have, the common experience we have when we actually go into an election.
So how important is it that Dominic Cummings is now sitting in number 10 conducting this election campaign?
It's important that every single political party has all embraced this kind of targeted ads. You know, these are data-optimized, highly granular, targeted ads that we as independent researchers, journalists, we can't see. That's so difficult, I think, for us to then know, like, whether and in what ways campaigns are telling lies or different kinds of stories to different kinds of communities which other communities can't see.
Brett Bruin, Facebook reputedly knows us better than our own mothers do. If they are not reined in, if there's no regulation to stop them pumping out their stuff, and they've said they're not going to go along with what Twitter is doing, how much will they influence or allow others to influence this forthcoming election in the US?
Well, I fear considerably, and unfortunately, Facebook, in the 2018 elections, legislative elections here in the U.S., stood up a war room and then quickly stood it down. This is remarkable considering that much of the disinformation that is pushed out takes place not only before, during, and certainly after these elections. Because bear in mind that if you're Russia, China, Iran, what you're striving to do is to sow distrust, to generate division in the country, and that can easily be done before an election as it can be during the election.
Just to ask me, I'm going to ask you very briefly, why is Facebook resisting going down the Twitter road of banning these political ads? Is it because of money or because of their fundamental platform? Brett, quickly, why is Facebook resisting banning political ads in 10 seconds?
Well, I think quickly Zuckerberg has staked out a ground where he's saying, look, this is a question of freedom of speech, and we don't want to be the arbiters of it.
Okay, nicely summed up. Brett Bruin, Carl Miller, thank you very much indeed.
Now, also on the subject of foreign interference, some interesting things happening in Parliament today on the subject of Russia, and was it involved in trying to swing the 2016 referendum and 2017 referendum. A report by the Intelligence and Security Committee of Parliament that they were hoping to get out before the election. They're now accusing their chairman, accusing Downing Street of sitting on it. We understand it does address intelligence community concerns about Russian interference in those electoral processes. Downing Street not saying it will never come out, anything like that, but it has to be published essentially by Monday before the committee's dissolved. Good deal of disquiet, I would say, among civil servants as well as parliamentarians about the possibility that it will just be sat on.